Seen in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Morning, 9:30 on Monday, the 22nd of January. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
Tackling a BBC bias, the government has set out tougher scrutiny of the broadcaster to deal with perceived problems with impartiality. Lucy Fraser is the Culture Secretary.
What I'm interested in is what audiences say. And what we know from statistics from Ofcom is that audiences are feeling like the BBC is not performing that role in relation to impartiality.
DeSantis drops out. The Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, dropped out of the 2024 Republican presidential race. He's endorsed that man, Donald Trump.
Winston Churchill once remarked that success is not final, failure is not fatal, it is the courage to continue that counts. While this campaign has ended, the mission continues.
And Fergie's cancer shock. The Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, has revealed that she has skin cancer. This is just months after being treated for breast cancer.
And the storms are battering Britain. Storm Aisha hit the UK overnight with winds of up to 99 miles an hour, leaving tens of thousands without power and mass disruption for commuters. Our reporter Sophie Reaper is in Blackpool.
Well, the effects of Storm Aisha are still very much being felt here as high winds and even higher waves continue to batter the coastline.
We're going to be talking to an MP who is stranded, I say, on the Isle of Wight. He can't get here, but we're going to find out what it's like out there.
I could think of worse places to be stranded.
Me too. Let us know if you've been affected by the weather this morning. gbviews@gbnews.uk. I went to sleep. I thought the roof was going to fall in last night, and then I woke up this morning.
Calm.
London, calm, actually warm.
Maybe calm before the storm.
Yeah, I felt like it might have blown away all that cold air, though. What do you think at home? gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address this morning to get in touch. There's an awful lot to get through as well. But first of all, here's your very latest news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Commuters are facing travel disruption this morning after Storm Isha batters the UK, with all ScotRail trains suspended until after the morning rush hour. Police have urged people to avoid travel unless absolutely necessary. Winds topped 90 miles per hour across the country last night. A Met Office yellow warning for strong wind remains in place until midday, with warnings of gusts up to 80 miles per hour in exposed coastal areas. Network Rail has also suspended its services. Flights have been disrupted, with some cancellations also being made. Ofcom will gain more powers over BBC online services, including its news website, as part of changes unveiled by the government. Reforms aimed at improving impartiality at the broadcaster could allow the regulator to enforce action over articles it does not believe meet certain standards. Currently, Ofcom is only able to issue an opinion on the matter. However, government recommendations say it will be given increased oversight over the BBC's online public services, including its news site and its YouTube channel. The House of Lords will debate the Prime Minister's controversial Rwanda bill and its safety for asylum seekers. The legislation was approved last week, with only 11 MPs voting against it. Many peers have already expressed their concerns about the scheme to put some asylum seekers on a one-way flight to the East African nation. But the Prime Minister has urged the upper house not to block what he's called the will of the people. The Duchess of York says she's in shock, but in good spirits after being diagnosed with skin cancer. Sarah Ferguson says she's taking some time to herself after having several moles removed, with one being identified as cancerous. It's just months after undergoing treatment for breast cancer. She's thanked well-wishers and medical staff for the support she's been given. And Donald Trump has described Republican rival Ron DeSantis as a really terrific person after he ended his presidential campaign and endorsed the former president. His surprise announcement comes ahead of this week's New Hampshire Republican primary, where he was polling in the single digits. Trump also said he wanted to thank DeSantis and says he looks forward to working with him. His departure leaves Nikki Haley as Mr. Trump's only significant rival. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Right, we're on the telly. The BBC is to get tougher scrutiny over concerns about bias within the organisation.
About time. Ofcom, the broadcasting watchdog, is going to give powers to the police to police the corporation's websites and social media.
So Lucy Fraser is the Culture Secretary, and she spoke to GB News this morning.
Look, what I'm interested in is what audiences say. And what we know from statistics from Ofcom is that audiences are feeling like the BBC is not performing that role in relation to impartiality, and they are getting less impartial. So last year, 39% of complaints about the BBC were about impartiality, when the year before they were 19%. So trust in the impartiality of the BBC, unfortunately, is going down.
Now, in response to this about their impartiality, the BBC have said no other organisation takes its commitment to impartiality more seriously. We have well-established and detailed plans to sustain and further improve standards. We know this matters to audiences, and the BBC continues to be the #1 source for trusted news, with the highest scores for impartiality and accuracy. I don't necessarily share that opinion about their impartiality and their accuracy, particularly in the last 4 years. Andrew, what about you?
Well, I don't watch it very often, so it's a bit difficult to tell.
You don't know.
I've pretty much given up on it. But I think a classic example is their obstinacy over what's happening in Gaza. They refused initially to have anything to do with calling Hamas terrorists. Eventually, after huge pressure, they now say an organisation prescribed as terrorist by the government. Come on, everybody knows they're terrorists. It's a flipping disgrace that the state-funded broadcaster won't get with it.
You see, they would say that is a classic example of their impartiality, in that they aren't taking a stand on a very complex...
No, it's their partiality.
...political
It's their
situation.
partiality towards Palestine.
Arguably, it is. Let us know what you think at home, gbviews@gbnews.com. Well, joining us now is former BBC executive and presenter Roger Bolton. Good morning, Roger. Thank you very much for joining us again on this topic. So how will this change things at the BBC and for the staff there if they're going to be Ofcom regulated? So just so people understand, up until now, the BBC effectively have their own complaints department, whereas other channels like us, we are regulated by Ofcom, and that is how we get our broadcasting licence. What will this mean for the BBC?
Well, I think what we've got to say is that the BBC is still the most impartial organisation. I'm not paid by the BBC. I've been very critical of it, but it is. What's happening is this. We're at a period, in, say, the Gaza conflict, when very, very, very strong and very different opinions are held in this country about a whole range of things. Trying to hold the line is nearly impossible. On the one hand, you get in Jewish Chronicle, Melanie Phillips calling the BBC the Hamas Broadcasting Corporation. On the other hand, you get massive demonstrations by people supporting the Palestinians who are deeply upset by the government. You look at the country as a whole, we're a very unhappy country after Brexit. It would be astonishing if everybody thought the BBC was. So is there a real problem? I don't think there's a major problem. I think there's a problem with giving Ofcom too much power. Because Ofcom is chaired by a Conservative peer. And there's also worry about the BBC directors, non-executive directors, having more control than other proposals, because they're nominated by government. Just think, in a year's time, we probably will have a Labour government. They put a Labour person into Ofcom as the chair. They start to select the BBC governors. Be very, very careful about giving too much power to Ofcom. When it's appointed, its chair, appointed by the government, and is a government reporter.
It's a very good point, actually, Roger, because effectively what you're saying is this is about more government control of the state's broadcaster. The government would say, well, this is in order to render the content impartial, but of course, as you say, the risk is that all it means is that it becomes more of the voice piece of propaganda for whichever government is in power at that time.
There's always a danger. It's not the state broadcaster. We applaud that. It's not the state broadcaster. It's the national broadcaster. I think it's different. It's not funded directly by tax. It's funded by what many people trust. Look, the BBC has always bent a bit. Whoever government is in power, it needs the licence to increase. It's not. But there are a lot of people passionately committed in the new and elsewhere in the organisation to try and stop that and to push it back. So there's a perpetual argument going on and leaks to the press. This is very healthy. I would say that, organisations like your own, and I welcome GBNews, I would welcome them, are fine. You are partial to a degree. You're very clear about where you stand. You listen to people like me, boring on to you, but you're very clear. That's fine as long as somewhere there's an organisation which tries to be and is required to be impartial. But beware of governments extending power on broadcasters. It's always dangerous.
Of course, but Roger, you know there is a problem, surely. It was no less a figure than Mark Thompson, who was Director General of the BBC, a very good Director General of the BBC, who said that he conceded there was a problem with an institutional bias to the left. And he said it was there when he arrived and it was there when he left. And I would argue it's still there.
Well, hold on a second. I was his editor when he was a young researcher, and I presume I'm the editor. He wasn't complaining about me, we were mates. What is true is a lot of young people go to the BBC. Younger people tend to be socially literate. They don't have any views usually about the economy and else like that. So it's absolutely true that younger people tend to be more socially literate. But their editors and their bosses are older. None of the governors and there's everything else. So there's continual dialogue. I would say that the BBC's bias in the past has been more metropolitan. And it's the greater danger is that it is out of touch with different parts of the country and what people feel. It's got to work at that. But it tries desperately hard to be impartial, and I think largely is. Politicians aren't. That's their job, not to be impartial.
But being metropolitan is an outrage, because they shouldn't be metropolitan because of the people who pay the licence fee. Most of them aren't metropolitan. And look what happened during Brexit, Roger. It was shameful. I'm just looking at what Roger Mosey, no less, a former colleague of yours, former director of BBC Television, said. He said, during the Brexit debate, Brexit voters were portrayed by the BBC as angry people in fish and chip shops in Clapton. I was one of those people in that fish and chip shop, Roger.
Yes, I've never been to Clapton. I'm afraid I do like fish and chips. Roger, I like him. He's a good guy. He writes very well, interestingly. That's bonkers. That's just daft. Look, what went wrong with Brexit apart from the BBC, I agree, not being sufficiently in tune what people thought, is we didn't have the second part of the argument. The first part of the argument is, what's wrong with membership of Europe? And the second part, is there anything better? I blame the broadcasters for asking once we leave, what we're going to do. We didn't have that debate. The government didn't have that debate. The country's left in a situation where we don't know what we're doing. I think that was the fault of broadcasters, not to look forward and say, OK, decided to leave, what do you do now? That was actually a failure of journalism. As for Roger Motor's line, it's a good line, but it's not very true.
All right. Well, he would say that, though, of course, wouldn't he?
Thank you, Roger.
Roger Bolton, who was, of course, a very senior BBC executive.
I am not paid by the BBC.
I know you're not. I know you're not. But I think once a BBC man, Roger, always a BBC man. Forgive me. Once a BBC man, always a BBC man. Roger, thank you. He's shouting away at me. He's shouting away at me still. Sarah Vine's in the studio with me. Sarah.
I love Roger Bolton.
He's great.
I know, his voice just is.
Yeah,
so,
he's great.
It's such an iconic voice.
I used to listen to him on Radio 4 and loved him.
Brilliant.
But I love the BBC's dramatic output, what they do. I like the iPlayer. I don't want to listen to BBC News patronising me and sneering at me.
I think the thing about the BBC is it's always had a sort of gentleman's agreement with the British public, which is that it has this huge sort of remit and power and it will sort of behave itself. And it just feels like over the last few years, it's slightly let that slip. And I think like you, Andrew, most people still love the BBC, but they're just a bit annoyed with it because it does annoying things like Gary Lineker and stuff like that.
Well said.
And so I think that's what it sort of needs to get its own house in order. I thought what Roger Bolton was saying about the sort of culture inside the BBC of the executives and the people who work there. I've done lots of shows on the BBC, and they're basically Guardian readers. Not that that's who they are. Those are their political leanings, and that's fine. But there is a very strong centre-left bias throughout, and it's not just in the output. It's also within the thing.
Just want to say on the Guardian, it may sound like a trivial point, but it's true. Every year it comes out which newspapers do the BBC buy en masse most. Way ahead.
I mean,
it's the Guardian and Observer, and the Daily Mail are way down the bottom.
I don't think I've ever seen a copy of the Daily Mail.
No, they hate us.
And it's funny because if ever I do go on, which I don't very much, there's always a sort of slight sense of surprise that I don't actually have a set of horns and a tail. And there is definitely that culture, and the metropolitan point is very good as well.
But it's interesting because what we're effectively talking about are the people who are working there. So who is creating the output, who's writing the scripts, and we're talking about a sort of predominantly privately educated, a kind of champagne socialist crowd, actually. They do very well, they get paid well.
I mean, if you ever watched W1A, I mean,
it's a great satire.
Which is a brilliant satire, but it's actually, it's...
But does this be Ofcom being involved with BBC's output, will it change that? It can't change
It can't get involved with what it puts on air. It can't do any of that.
But what if you want to change the way the output that the BBC does, you have to change the culture at the BBC. You can't just beat them with a stick because it won't work. It needs to be organic and it needs to come from within. And so they just need to employ some people who are maybe not quite so much in that category.
There's that
have some different views.
At the moment, programmes are marking their own homework. So there's a complaint about this programme. Somebody else has it's fine then. It's got to be... If we screw up on this programme, we are going to be... Ofcom are going to come down on us.
But I think if they just had some different voices within the organisation, slightly pushing back against the... Because it's quite a lazy culture, it's... I mean, the reason W1A is such a good parody is that it's so easy to parody because it's so obvious.
They're not as hungry, though, as a commercial broadcaster like GB News, which is fighting for its life the whole time, because they don't have to worry about it.
No, they don't.
Right, Sarah, stay with us. So yesterday, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis dropped out of the 2024 presidential race for the Republican Party.
The Trump campaign responded with a statement saying it was time for Republicans to rally behind him to defeat Joe Biden.
So Donald Trump was filmed giving this reaction to the news.
He just said, will I be using the name Ron DeSanctimonious? I said, that name is officially retired.
So if you couldn't hear what he said then, he said, I've been told... So he used this nickname, Ron DeSanctimonious, for Ron DeSantis, and he said that nickname has been officially retired. Sarah Elliott is a spokeswoman for Republicans overseas. Good morning, Sarah. Great to see you.
Morning.
Great to see you. Right, your reaction then to Ron DeSantis pulling out. What does this mean?
Well, this means that Nikki Haley is the only candidate that might be able to dethrone the Donald, but it's looking less and less likely. We are moving into New Hampshire, where DeSantis saw he didn't have a path to victory. It's a more moderate voting bloc. Trump still leads there with 54% of the vote. Nikki Haley comes in second with 37%. But she's got to do a lot better with conservatives if she's going to beat the Donald. And everyone is guessing that Trump will walk away with it with a big margin tomorrow. And then really, what's the point of South Carolina and all the other primaries? There will be that kind of anticipation. Everybody will know that the Donald is getting coronated and he is the Republican nominee for president.
And $150 million DeSantis has spent, Sarah. How did he get it so badly wrong? Because he was seen as the one person who could stop Trump.
Well, you know, I think it's kind of it's a Trump factor. I don't know if anybody could actually take on Trump and really dethrone him and really get him out of the race. He's Teflon Don. And, you know, I think DeSantis did a lot of things right with Iowa. He put all his efforts on the ground, visited all 99 counties, had all the right endorsements. You know, you could argue he should have started his race 6 months earlier, 5 months earlier, right after the midterms. And Donald Trump was seen as a real weight on the Republican ticket, really dragging us down, lost another election cycle. But, you know, maybe it's just not his time.
OK, thank you, Sarah. I'm afraid it's brief this morning. We've got a very packed show. Sarah,
I want to know what the other Sarah thinks. Trump. It's going to be Trump versus...
It's going to be Trump, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. I mean, I'm fascinated by this because they're going to have their election in November and we're going to have our election in November.
Ours will probably be the week after.
So ours will probably be the week after. So America could elect a kind of slightly swivel-eyed orange man.
Only slightly.
Only slightly. I know you love him.
I don't love him. He's just better than Biden.
And then we could end up with Starmer, which that would be quite interesting for the Atlantic, you know, for the special relationship.
But some of the Tories think if the election, the general election here is a week after Trump is elected, people will be so panicked by the instability caused by Trump. People think, stay with the devil you know.
Yeah.
Which
so it could play in the Conservative favour.
Yeah.
That's interesting,
It's really fascinating.
Yeah. The trouble for Ron DeSantis is he had all the same policies as Trump. He just wasn't Trump.
Yeah.
No.
Because he is so much bigger, and what he represents to the people who feel completely disenfranchised from the elite in America, and they feel that they are poorer, that life is not as kind to them. We have the same here. We have the
migrants pouring in every day on the Mexican border.
Borders, that they see that Trump will be their saviour.
Well, I think a lot of people think that he needs to finish the job.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the thing. They've seen a bit of him.
And they still think he was cheated last time.
They still think he was cheated last time. They think he should finish the job. They think that you know, Biden's been a disaster and weak and all of this kind of stuff. And do you think that he'll run as his running mate?
I think he was so rude about him just there, wasn't he?
I
think he'll go. I think he'll probably have a woman.
Yes.
Who's going to do that? Which woman wants to run for him?
Well,
is he going to grope her boobs?
It is going to get very interesting, though, isn't it? No.
I mean, you know, it's so in the realms of the mad what's happening in America. Sort of almost anything could happen.
You never thought.
I mean, if you were writing a TV script about a crazy, you know, presidential, you wouldn't think
that
this would...
that America, with a population of 330 million, is going to serve up those two.
Yeah.
Again, one who's 81 already and one who's 77.
Exactly.
System is just completely flawed, isn't it?
Bonkers. It's about money.
Right, we need to move on. Thank you so much, Sarah. So, winds of up to 90 miles an hour have battered the UK as storm Isha sweeps across Britain.
The Met Office has warned of danger to lives from flying debris, with thousands suffering from power cuts and flooding. Why? Ridiculous.
Parts of Scotland, the Isle of Man and Northern Ireland are on tornado watch. I mean, you can watch out for a tornado. It doesn't necessarily mean there's
don't think it's going to do you much good. It's coming. I think you should put your tin helmet on.
We're joined now by our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie, in Port Stewart, and our North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, who is in Blackpool. Dougie, to you first. Any sign of the tornado that we're watching for?
Well, if there was going to be a tornado, it would be here across the bay here at McGilligan, straight in to Port Stewart. And you can see behind me, actually, the sun has broke out there. You can no longer see McGilligan Point in behind us. But yeah, last night I was trying to do a live here and there was 80-mile-an-hour winds. It was quite hard, I can assure you. I've got the better deal this morning than Sophie. But there's over 50,000 homes, up to 50,000 homes without power in Northern Ireland, nearly 235,000 premises in the Republic of Ireland with no power. And there's over 1,000 blockages on the roads here due mainly to fallen trees. And of course, we have the public sector strikes here in Northern Ireland, which means a lot of the lads that would be cutting those trees out of the forestry won't be out and about. So that will delay things even further here. But these storms are pretty much rehearsed in Northern Ireland over and over the years. We're well used to them, and the electricity service here will be fit to connect locals very, very shortly. So Northern Ireland very much getting back to normal this morning, and unfortunately for England, that has crossed the Irish Sea and is now with yourselves.
OK, thank you so much, Dougie. Talking of which, let's go to Sophie Reaper in the wonderful town of Blackpool. Sophie, Blackpool is no stranger to a windy day there on the front. I've been there many a times. How is it today?
Well, it's absolutely very, very windy here today. You can see that the coastline, the flood defences are being absolutely battered by very, very high waves. We may have been downgraded to a yellow wind warning, but it certainly doesn't feel like it here in Blackpool today. The Met Office still warning people, though, that there could be danger to life, especially people in coastal towns and cities all over the UK like Blackpool. They are being warned to take extreme caution today, and it seems that people are adhering to that because there really is no one around here on the front in Blackpool this morning.
All right, that's Sophie and Dougie, thanks. And sticking with the weather, here is your latest forecast. Tin helmet time.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. Storm Isha brought some very wet and windy weather across the UK last night, but it will gradually be moving away. However, it will still leave a very windy day through Monday. Plenty of blustery showers pushing in from the west, these likely to be heaviest across Northern Ireland and into parts of Scotland. And for Scotland, we could even see some wintry showers across the high ground. The best of the sunshine across the south and the east through Monday afternoon, and temperatures here we could reach 10 or 11 degrees. But with some strong northwesterly winds, that will take the edge off the temperatures for all of us. Through the rest of Monday, those showers continue to push in from the west, turning particularly heavy across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland. But they will gradually start to ease from the southwest, so turning a little bit drier here through later on Monday and into the early hours of Tuesday morning. So there will be some clear spells and a bit of a drier start to Tuesday itself. A chillier night compared to Sunday night, temperatures widely dropping in the low to mid-single figures, perhaps a little milder across the very far southwest, but we could even see a touch of frost across parts of Scotland. Those drier conditions to start on Tuesday don't last long as this next system pushes in from the west through the day on Tuesday, bringing some particularly heavy rain to Northern Ireland, western parts of Scotland, into northwest England and Wales as well, which could lead to some further flooding after we've already seen that rain from Storm Isha. Strong winds will also accompany this, as well as those mild temperatures, so temperatures generally remaining above average for the time of year.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10 o'clock on Monday, the 22nd of January. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
Tackling BBC bias. The government has set out tougher scrutiny of the broadcaster to deal with perceived problems with impartiality. Lucy Fraser is the Culture Secretary.
What I'm interested in is what audiences say. And what we know from statistics from Ofcom is that audiences are feeling like the BBC is not performing that role in relation to impartiality.
And DeSantis drops out. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has dropped out of the 24 presidential race. He's given his backing to Donald Trump. Our reporter, Ray Addison, has the latest.
Now that it's a two-horse race, Nikki Haley is under increasing pressure to put on a strong showing in tomorrow's New Hampshire vote. Otherwise, she could be gone within 48 hours.
Basil's taxi victory. We love this story. A taxi driver has won his fight with Shropshire Council to fly the Union flag on his vehicle as a mark of being a proud Englishman. We're going to bring you that report very shortly.
And battered Britain. Storm Aisha battered the UK overnight with 99 miles per hour winds, leaving tens of thousands without power and mass disruption for commuters this morning on trains, roads and ferries. We're going to be talking to one MP who couldn't make it back to Westminster yesterday. And quite interesting, it might feel a bit niche, this story, but boarding schools who are letting transgender pupils sleep in the boarding house of the gender they choose to be. What do you make of that?
And if you were paying a lot of money for your kid to go to that school, what would you make of that? Do let us know.
I tell you what you would make of it. You would feel you couldn't complain, because it's the kind of thing you're not allowed to say. Am I right?
What's happening to this country?
gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. First, though, the very latest news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you. 2 minutes past 10. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The most severe wind warnings have now passed after Storm Isha hit with gusts of up to 99 miles per hour, disrupting airlines and cutting power supplies. Northern Ireland Electricity Network said 40,000 customers are now without power. Commuters across the country have been facing travel disruption this morning, with all ScotRail trains suspended until after the morning rush hour. A Met Office yellow warning for strong wind remains in place until midday, with warnings of gusts of up to 80 miles per hour in exposed coastal areas. Police are urging people to avoid travel unless absolutely necessary. Ofcom will gain more powers over BBC online services, including its news website, as part of changes unveiled by the government. Reforms aimed at improving impartiality of the broadcaster could allow the regulator to enforce action over articles it does not believe meet certain standards. Currently, Ofcom is only able to issue an opinion on the matter. However, government recommendations say it will be given increased oversight over the BBC's online public services, including its news site and its YouTube channel. Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser told GB News it's important new rules are respected.
The impartiality of the BBC is really important, and I think it's really important that those who work for the BBC, and this is what the guidelines say, respect that impartiality, and that they don't undermine the reputation of the BBC. Obviously, it's for the BBC and not for me to determine whether those guidelines have been crossed by any particular presenter, and it's something that I know audiences and I are monitoring very carefully.
The Duchess of York says she's in shock but in good spirits after being diagnosed with skin cancer. Sarah Ferguson says she's taking some time to herself after having several moles removed, with one being identified as cancerous. It's just months after undergoing treatment for breast cancer. She's thanked well-wishers and medical staff for the support that she's been given. Close to 500,000 households will be unable to afford to keep their homes warm this winter following a price cap increase this month. Outra revealed the increase on January 1st led to a 12% rise in households affected by fuel poverty compared to October last year. The data firm says the cost of living crisis is still dominating households right across the country. According to the new research, the UK now has 4.29 million households experiencing fuel poverty. That's up from 3.83 million. The Labour Party is accusing the government of turning a blind eye to what it's calling corruption after new data showed water bosses are pocketing millions of pounds despite overseeing illegal sewage spills. Figures show water chiefs have received more than £10 million in bonuses and almost £15 million in incentives since the last general election in 2019. It's also received just over £621,000 in benefits. Earlier today on GB News, Shadow Environment Secretary Steve Reid was asked what Labour would do differently if it was in power.
You're meant to get a bonus when you're doing a good job, not when you're overseeing failure and illegal behaviour, and yet this is what's going on. Your question was how can we deal with that problem? Well, what we would do is we would amend the Water Industry Act to give the regulator, Ofwat, the power they need to ban water bosses paying themselves bonuses while they are responsible for severe and repeated levels of illegal sewage discharge into our waterways.
Millions of parents in England are being urged to book measles jabs for their children amid a growing risk of outbreaks across the country. Officials say the decline in maintaining routine childhood vaccinations is concerning. It's after the UK Health Security Agency declared a national incident, confirming 216 cases and 103 probable cases in the West Midlands since October. A vaccine catch-up scheme will target all parents of children aged 6 to 11, urging them to make an appointment for any missed MMR jabs. And Donald Trump has described Republican rival Ron DeSantis as a really terrific person as he ended his presidential campaign and endorsed the former president. His surprise announcement comes ahead of this week's New Hampshire Republican primary, where Mr. DeSantis was polling in the single digits. Trump also said he wanted to thank Mr. DeSantis and said he looks forward to working with him. His departure leaves Nikki Haley as Mr. Trump's only significant rival. Those are your top stories on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Very good morning. It's 10:07. Let's see what you've been saying at home. Brian has said, when Labour lost the last election, the BBC went into mourning for a week. I couldn't believe it. Their left-wing bias is incredible.
They didn't see that landslide coming. They also did not see Brexit coming, did they? Because they hardly talked about it. And as Roger Mosey said in that piece, people who supported Brexit were derided as we went to a fish and chip shop in Clapham.
And they didn't once question lockdown policy for me. They didn't question it. It was so one-sided, that whole debate. GB News, as always, we've always strived to give you both sides of every story. Yes, we have opinion as well, and we know that you like to hear opinion because, frankly, who wants to sit around a dinner table with people who don't have an opinion?
Boring and bland.
Boring and bland.
You don't have to agree with us, but that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Michael says the problem with the BBC, I think this is spot on, Michael, they think they are the government.
Telmo has said BBC is out of touch. It does not represent the general view of people. It is time to stop the TV licence and the ludicrous, unjustified high salaries. It's my money. I should have a say where that money goes or stop charging TV licence. I think it's important to draw a distinction, actually, between BBC News output, and I have to say, I always like their local news, as BBC did very, very well, I wouldn't watch it really now, but they've always done local news very well. But their broadcast output in terms of their drama, their factory entertainment, the best stuff in the world, the Repair Shop, Antiques Roadshow, all that, lovely TV, lovely. But when it comes to news...
They do, but also they do too much, too many channels. I mean, years ago they were going to get rid of BBC Six. Why have they still got BBC Three,
don't know what's
BBC
on BBC
Four?
Six.
They're the two... I mean, they got rid of BBC Three, the TV station, and brought it back.
Yeah. Alex says, I'm a 90-year-old widower and I paid the TV licence. I never watched BBC on television for years. Why do I have to pay the licence?
And why are 3,500 people every month being prosecuted for not paying the licence? That's an outrage. You're not a criminal if you don't pay the TV licence.
Yeah.
You are not a criminal. And it's a BBC prosecution because, of course, a bit like the Post Office, they can do their own prosecutions.
Yeah. Keep your emails coming in this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com. We love to hear from you. So winds of up to nearly 100 miles an hour have battered the UK as Storm Aisha sweeps across Britain.
The Met Office says there's still a danger to lives from flying debris and, of course, many people, as you know, are experiencing power cuts and flooding.
So joining us now is Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight, Bob Seeley, who was stranded, Bob. Stranded. I mean, it looks beautiful behind you now. You live in one of the best places in the entire world, in my opinion. But you couldn't get home yesterday. What was the weather like? What happens on the Isle of Wight when it's like that with the ferries?
We slightly battened down the hatches. The passenger ferries were cancelled through most of yesterday, really from about lunchtime onwards. So the hovercraft and the two passenger services. And I think the even Whitelink, the car ferry services were shut down last night at the height of the storm. They're all back up now because, as you can see, it's beautiful mild weather now. Well, there's still a wind behind, a bit of wind behind us, and I don't know if you can hear the roar of the sea. But it was pretty tasty last night.
Massive difference, wasn't it? From when we all went to bed last night, I thought the trees were going to fall in on the house in the middle of the night and woke up and it is glorious. Do you think sometimes, Bob, we're relying too much on the forecast looking forward? So the ferries would have been cancelled, I imagine, for today without waiting to see what the weather would be like in the morning. That must be particularly frustrating when you live on an island.
Yeah, it wasn't great. I mean, to be honest, I think the ferries could have run, the passenger ferries probably could have run for another couple of services yesterday, but look, I don't blame them. They're thinking of the safety of their passengers. They're shutting down the service. We know a storm is coming. What's actually almost worse for the island, because we sort of slightly take the cancellations in storms and bad weather in our stride, what does affect people in a way which is almost worse is the landslips and the landslides. So back in December, we had one of our worst landslides for about 20 years in Ventnor and Bonchurch, which is about 8 miles over to my right. And we had one road shut because of a landslip back in 10 years ago going into Ventnor, the coast road, the Undercliff Road. And we've now got another road which is potentially long-term affected as well. So Ventnor used to have 3 A roads into the town. It's now only got one. And the railway was taken out in the 1960s as well. And we've got potentially the military road behind me. That's running very close to the sea now as well, because we've had coastal erosion since the military road was built back in the 1860s, and that's now creeping really close. So actually the worst is not the storms, but the potential, the damage being done, long-term damage to our infrastructure.
Don't we have to get better at planning for this stuff, Bob? Because with people this morning who've got power outages all across the UK, and surely we recognise that in times of storms, power lines are going to get brought down. We just seem to be a bit rubbish at coping with anything that's out of the ordinary.
You're absolutely right, Bev. We're not great at doing either heat or cold. We are getting better. So on the island, since the 1990s, our coastline has been more closely monitored, especially around Ventnor, because the Undercliff is the most unstable inhabited part of Europe because of all the rocks the pressure on the earth and the different types of soft clays and soft rocks, etc. So it is one of the places where there are the most landslips anywhere in Europe. So we're getting better at monitoring, but what we're not necessarily doing at getting better at that very long-term planning, although again the Environment Agency, to give them their credit, are spending tens of millions in trying to solidify that coastline so we get fewer landslips further up the hill.
Right. Can I ask you about another big story today, Bob? On the front of the Telegraph, in all the broadsheets, the government say that Ofcom are going to have more power over the BBC, over complaints, issues of impartiality and bias. Do you welcome that?
Yeah. I do, and I slightly despair at the BBC. I think, look, for me, I remember when I was a junior foreign reporter back in the 90s in the Soviet Union, you used to see, whenever I saw a BBC satellite dish at some story I was in some godforsaken part of the Soviet Union, I was really happy to see it, because A, it meant that the Times would want more copy from me, because when I was a reporter, but also B, because you were really proud that the BBC was British. And I think for me that the BBC has really lost its way. It hasn't become, it's stopping being if you like, a service that is curious about the world, especially its news, what Bev was talking about. And it's become sort of lecturing, and it's important that it makes this point in diversity and that point in diversity. And you just wonder if maybe they spent less time lecturing us on Black Lives Matters and maybe doing more time investigating the post office scandal, if real stories could actually be picked up and real scandals could have been investigated rather better than they have been. I think for me, the BBC, it lectures us in its comedy, it lectures us in its drama, and it lectures us in its news, and that's not the purpose of the BBC. So it's really got to change its ways, because I think it's lost its way, I'm afraid.
And just briefly, the papers are reporting also today 3,500 people are being prosecuted sometimes every week, every month, for not paying their TV licence. You're not a criminal, Bob, in my view, if you don't pay your TV licence. There's got to be another way.
I mean, look, this is a difficult one. I would love to support the TV licence. At the moment, I'm not sure I could ever bring myself to vote for the extension of the TV licence, because the BBC has to speak for everybody or it speaks for nobody. And the problem is, everyone who's conservative thinks the BBC is failing, and everyone on the left of British politics thinks the BBC is great. And that, for me, indicates that the BBC is on one side of the political argument and not on the other side. I don't know the answer. I hear, Andrew, what you say about private prosecutions, because we've seen the disgrace of the post office prosecuting people. It was mainly under New Labour, and then unfortunately Ed Davey did his completely useless role as post office minister in pretty much covering all that up. So we've seen what happens when you have private entities prosecute people and the injustice that accompanies it. So maybe we need to look at again at that. But right now I wouldn't be voting, sadly, for the BBC licence fee, because the BBC has to prove that it's for everybody and not just one segment with one voice. And it really does speak for urban elites. And I agree with a lot of what your viewers are saying.
All right, that's Bob Seeley. That's Bob. Well, we've lost him anyway. So
He's got a ferry to catch.
Probably the storm. That's Bob Seeley, who, of course, is the Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight.
I was thinking about the BBC as well. It's the fact that also they write off a lot of people as far right. So the Canadian truckers were far right. The German tractors, far right. The BBC just bandy that phrase around with no meaning.
And they don't very often say far left, do they?
No. Right, moving on. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has dropped out of the 24 presidential race for the Republican Party, and he released this video on X.
We can't ask our supporters to volunteer their time and donate their resources if we don't have a clear path to victory. Accordingly, I am today suspending my campaign.
Ron DeSantis, that was a surprise. I mean, I knew he wasn't going to win, but to have pulled out so soon. We've got Ray Addison with us in the studio. Ray, I know you're an American presidential election policy wonk, wonk full stop. Did you see this coming so soon?
Well, about a week ago, he started his super PAC, Don't Back Down, started relieving staff, and that was a big sign. You know, essentially started backing down, and obviously it's now closed. So that was a big hint. He started cancelling TV interviews. So ahead of his resignation last night, he'd actually cancelled his interviews for this weekend.
Right.
And I think he just went home, maybe went to Florida, had a good look in the mirror. He thought, look, I spent $200 million on Iowa.
It's expensive.
I mean, that's a lot of money.
It is.
30 points behind Trump. OK, he came second, but he was still 30 points behind Trump.
So only do one, Iowa.
For Iowa, that was $200 million. He was polling at something like 6% in New Hampshire, way behind both of the other two candidates. And it just, you know, how much longer can you keep spending money?
So the question people are asking this morning, Ray, is will he run with Trump?
I think it's very unlikely. Firstly, he's got some major problems that is the reason why he's had to drop out. You've got to remember, back in January of 2023, he was only about 10 points behind President Trump. He was seen as, you know, maybe the safe pair of hands who could take over the future of MAGA. But he's got troubles with his presentation style. He's not able to engage with people.
I don't know. I disagree. My heart's a little broken this morning, Ray.
OK, well, you know, there's something for everybody.
I'm a big fan. Well, of course I would be a fan, because he ran Florida. He didn't lock down. They had lower excess mortality than other states. That's where the clear water is between him and Trump. He even said in his speech, didn't he, yesterday, when he was announcing that he wasn't standing anymore, the difference between me and Trump is that Trump still locked down millions of people in a way that I wouldn't have done.
Yeah, I think certainly when it comes to some issues like COVID, maybe like abortion, where he's taken a particular stance, there will be people that were very supportive of that. But in general, his just ability to sort of connect with people. He wouldn't take advice. You know, his wife is a TV news anchor in Florida. You know, he would take her advice but ignore all the people he was paying lots of money to. And so, you know, it was kind of destined to happen if he wasn't going to follow people's, you know, sort of expert advice. So can he run with Trump? It's unlikely. Donald Trump's probably going to pick a woman.
So I think.
He hinted a couple of days ago that, you know, Nikki Haley wasn't out of the question, and it kind of makes sense if you think, you know, politicians obviously go at each other when they're campaigning against each other, but then they can very quickly become friends again.
And she is clever.
She's very clever.
Unlike the vice president, who everybody now knows is just a dunce.
Well, I mean, obviously,
Kamala Harris.
Donald Trump made Nikki Haley U.S. ambassador to the UN in 2017. So he's obviously, you know, he says she's very clever, and she's obviously getting fairly good numbers. She's, you know, it's now a two-horse race. She's seen off. She said yesterday, you know, I've seen off like 14 men to get to this point, and so he might sit and think that, you know, I could take her following, combine it with mine, it's going to be sort of unbeatable. Also, if you look at how she's polling, if you look at Biden versus Haley, if she were to become the Republican presidential nomination, she's about 3 points ahead of Biden. Trump's only about 2 points ahead in most states. So if you combine those figures together, it could be a sensible thing to do. But there are other options, of course. I don't know if you guys saw the congressional hearing about anti-Semitism in universities.
This is Vivek Ramaswamy.
No, this is Elise Stefanik, she, Republican,
right?
And she was heading up those questioning of 3 university presidents, and people saying that was her audition to maybe become the VP.
Yeah, maybe. OK, thank you, Ray.
Really?
Now, the Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, has been diagnosed with skin cancer just months after being treated for breast cancer.
The diagnosis comes after she had several cancerous moles removed. So we're going to talk now to the royal historian and commentator, Rafe Heidel-Manku. Rafe, this is, blimey, it's like a wait for a London bus, you wait for one and then 3 come along in one go. We've had Kate, we've had the Princess of Wales, the King. Now, I know Sarah Ferguson isn't technically a member of the royal family, but this is... bad news comes in 3s.
Yes, absolutely. And for the Duchess of York, bad news comes in 2 because 6 months ago she was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent a single mastectomy and breast reconstruction. And it was actually when she had additional reconstructive surgery just before Christmas that several moles were removed, one of which was found to be a malignant melanoma, which is an aggressive form of skin cancer. Basically, there are 2 types of skin cancer: melanoma and non-melanoma, which is less aggressive and easier to treat. But the Duchess has been treated and is also undergoing tests to make sure that the cancer was at the early stages and hasn't spread to other parts. It was quite distressing, obviously, to receive this news, because it's worth noting that speaking in November on television, she admitted that she still sometimes woke in a panic during the night, wondering if she might develop cancer somewhere else. And that was just a month before the diagnosis. But she said to be in good spirits and has no intention of letting this down. She's been recuperating in Austria, and she's now back in the UK under the care of the King Edward VII Hospital and the Royal Marsden Hospital. And I should just, salute the Royal Marsden particularly, because they looked after my own mother for 5 years when she had cancer till she died in 2022, and they really are world class.
OK, we've got to keep it short, I'm afraid, Rafe. Rafe Heidel-Manku there, reflecting on the health news of Sarah Ferguson. Now, still to come, have you ever had a nightmare boss, or one that had a positive impact on your life? Well, it seems the snowflakes have won. There's no room anymore for tough bosses in the workplace. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
10:26 with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Now, an interesting piece yesterday in The Telegraph as a great chef, Michel Roux Jr., closed his doors on his London restaurant and declared an end to the bullying chef's culture.
I think he's talking about Gordon Ramsay, isn't he? And the other one, Marco Pierre White. But are the big bosses bullies, or are the woke generation too soft? We're going to talk to the Telegraph columnist who wrote that very clever piece, William Sitwell, who's also a MasterChef judge. Am I right? He's talking about Mr. Ramsay and Marco Pierre White as bullies?
Well, he hasn't actually mentioned them by name, but we all know that Marco and Gordon came out of Gavroche and are the most famous tough characters in the kitchen in British culinary history. Well, certainly the last sort of 20, 30 years. So, you know, he's talking about those people. Raymond Blanc has been similarly vociferous on this issue, basically saying that kitchens should be places of calmness. And Michel Roux, as he shuts the door on the wonderful Gavroche, I suppose wants to usher in an era where people actually want to work in kitchens. You know, staff levels already.
You would think, William, that part of the thrill of the kitchen and the fire and the heat and the adrenaline, and people need their dinner and they need it to not be cold and we got to get it out there quick. That's part of the energy of those brilliant kitchens, isn't it?
Traditionally, that's always been the case. And you only have to look at Marco Pierre White's brilliant autobiography, which I often slave over. It's fantastic, where he describes in great detail. Did you write it by any chance, William?
No,
funnily enough, a wonderful guy called James Steen, who you probably know. He goes through that book and had great pleasure in retelling the stories of Marco when, you know, presented with a cheese board that wasn't 100% perfect, slung it against the wall. There was a young chef in his restaurant who complained it was too hot, so Marco created his own sort of ventilation, which was to slash the back of his apron and his trousers to give him some air. You know, we know these stories, and Marco says himself that he learned about the sort of the modus operandi of being intimidated at Gavroche from Albert Roux, who was notoriously tough. And he said that his chefs were adrenaline junkies. This is Marco talking, who sort of got high on this. And I have to tell you, and I read about this at the weekend, there isn't a famous chef today who worked under Marco who doesn't relish in telling the stories about how they were brutalized, how they were hung up on a rack on their apron, how they were screamed at, shouted at. And even customers, you know, used to go to Marco Pierre White's restaurant in South London and try and misbehave, so he would come out and abuse them. So it's part of the great story. And the problem is, you know, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that bosses should be bullying and unpleasant, far from it. But I pity the poor publishers in the future who are going to write the stories of today's, as you call it, snowflake generation, having such a lovely time. And, you know, where are the anecdotes? Where is the story? You know, conflict and more conflict. That's what we want in non-fiction as well as fiction. it's a bit dull, isn't it?
And William, also, I mean, I've had really tough bosses in newspapers over the years. You do not forget the lessons you learnt at their feet as they humiliate you in front of everybody. Lessons well learnt. And consensus isn't always the best way to get things out of people, in my view.
When I worked at, for example, the Sunday Express, I had a fairly tough and well-known female boss. I had very tough male bosses. I don't think any of them did it in a sort of personal way. I think it was basically they wanted to get the product out. They wanted to get a paper out. They needed their journalists to perform. And I remember complaining to one particular feature writer that, you know, I didn't think a story was stacked up. And he just told me, screamed at me, swearing, just to make it work so well. You know, you made it work, and you were sent out stories, and you made them work. And I think when I was editing a magazine called Waitress Food Illustrated, where I was out for about 20 years, I felt that was a sort of sleepy hollow compared to the brutal times I had on newspapers. And I remember those times with, you know, those brutal times with great affection. It builds you up. And I think you learn about how to deal with pressure. You can also learn that that's not the way to behave, and it's great that, you know, if you choose not to. But these are the stories that we sit around the fire and we have a glass of whiskey. Don't we? These are the stories that we share and we tell, and we're still standing.
Exactly, certainly are.
Looking very well. William Sitwell there.
Very
good to see you, William. We've had a whole generation of kids, though, who've not been ever put out of their comfort zone in schools. You can't lose, no competition.
You need to be humiliated just every now and then. Now, still to come, this is a cracking story.
I'm not sure the humiliation
I don't think it did me
necessary.
any harm. Still, this is a great story. You want to stay tuned for this. A taxi driver in Shropshire has won his appeal to display the Union flag on the bonnet of his cab. You don't want to miss the report.
That and much more after your morning's news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you. 10:32. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The most severe wind warnings have now passed after Storm Isha hit, with gusts of up to 99 miles per hour disrupting airlines and cutting power supplies. Northern Ireland Electricity Network said 40,000 customers are now without power. Commuters across the country have been facing travel disruption this morning, with all ScotRail trains suspended until after the morning rush hour. A Met Office yellow warning for strong wind remains in place until midday, with warnings of gusts of up to 80 miles per hour in exposed coastal areas. Police are urging people to avoid travel unless absolutely necessary. Ofcom will gain more powers over BBC online services, including its news website, as part of changes unveiled by the government. Reforms aimed at improving impartiality at the broadcaster could allow the regulator to enforce action over articles it doesn't believe meet certain standards. Currently, Ofcom is only able to issue an opinion on the matter. However, government recommendations say it'll be given increased oversight over the BBC's online services, including its YouTube channel. The Duchess of York says she's in shock but in good spirits after being diagnosed with skin cancer. Sarah Ferguson says she's taking some time to herself after having several moles removed, with one being identified as cancerous. It's just months after undergoing treatment for breast cancer. She's thanked well-wishers and medical staff for the support she's been given. And close to 500,000 households will be unable to afford to keep their homes warm this winter, following a price cap increase this month. Outra revealed the increase on January 1st led to a 12% rise in households affected by fuel poverty compared to October last year. The research has found the UK now has 4.29 million households experiencing fuel poverty. That's up from 3.83 million. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2702 and €1.1662 euros. The price of gold is £1,592 and 7 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,469 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Still to come this morning, a fantastic story. You will love it. It's about a taxi driver in Shropshire who's won a battle to display the Union Jack flag on his taxi. Don't miss it. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
(10:38). You're with Britain's News on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Now we are joined by former Labour advisor Matthew Larser and
morning.
author and broadcaster Emma Wolfe. Good morning to you both. But first, want to watch this story. A taxi
I'm so
driver
looking forward to this.
in Shropshire has won his appeal to display the Union flag on the bonnet of his taxi.
Basil Brockhurst, who served in the British Army in Northern Ireland and Iraq, had been told by Shropshire Council, of course he had, to remove it, stating it was against the council's licensing policy. Our reporter, Jack Carson, tells us more.
For ex-serviceman Basil Brockhurst, the Union flag means more than it might do for most. It flies high on the roof of this proud Shropshire man's home, but his decision to put an image of the flag on his taxi caused a controversy he couldn't understand.
On the 17th of October, they sent me an email stating that I was in breach of advertising standards and I had to remove the cross of St George and the Union Jack from my vehicle. Well, obviously, I was not happy. I was sort of quite perturbed. 30-year service, Queen country, Northern Ireland, Iraq, and then suddenly I'm told that I cannot display the Cross of St George or the Union Jack.
The ban on flags was stated in the Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Vehicles licensing policy agreed to by Shropshire Council in April 2023, stating there cannot be an advertisement which depicts any political, racial, cultural, sexual or potentially offensive language, symbols, flags or emblems. Now, after help from his local MP Helen Morgan and the Deputy Leader at Shropshire Council Ian Nellins, a vote to revise the regulations to allow one union flag per vehicle, no bigger than an A4 piece of paper, passed the Strategic Licensing Committee this month, but not without opposition from Green Party councillor Mike Isherwood.
It's needlessly divisive to introduce flags to taxis, especially if it's only privileging one nation's flag. So I find it unfair, discriminatory, and I'm surprised it would even be legal to do this. We should have a neutral policy on this, and that's best achieved with the current policy.
Basil, who served in the Light Infantry from 1975 to 1993, has wasted no time in making the most of the changed rules.
And this is the outcome of what I'm allowed now, because the council have overturned the ruling. And obviously, it's no bigger than an A4 piece of paper, but they didn't say what I could do to make it stand out. And as far as I know, I'm just advertising Basil's taxes. Now, I feel as though I'm still being penalised, and I'm being told what I can and what I can't have on a private vehicle.
He's aiming to go one step further and display a poppy with his regimental cap badge. But Shropshire Council say he needs to provide permissions from the Poppy Appeal and the Ministry of Defence before they can be displayed on his car. The first battle for this proud Brit has been won, but Basil's fight to include his remembrance display on his taxi continues. Jack Carson, GB News, Market Drayton.
Isn't it?
That makes my blood boil.
And that Green councillor, hang your head in shame, mister, about a flag. It's Britain. It's the flag of the Great Britain. It's the Union flag. Blimey, what's wrong? And what's wrong if he wants to put the flag of St George up? He's English.
This is an army veteran. He's served in the King's Shropshire Light Infantry for 20 years. He's served 3 tours of Northern Ireland. He's served in the Territorial Army. He served in Iraq, and he's not allowed to be proud of his country. He's not allowed. If people don't want to get in his taxi because it has a Union Jack or a Cross of St George or it has his regimental badge or it has a red poppy, they don't need to get in his taxi.
Would they have objected if it was the Scottish flag? Or the Welsh flag?
Well, I mean, as you say, the quote from that Green councillor. As the Green councillor replied, well, that would be privileging one country, one nation against another.
Which is what he did when he served for us.
Yeah, which is slightly weird because obviously we do privilege the country we live in. It's the country we live in, and as Emma quite rightly says, it's the one that he served so bravely.
Remember your mate Emily Thornton?
So I was about to say that she's not exactly. Emily and I are not particularly close, and in fact, it was on my very desk that Ed Miliband sacked her for her.
Remind people why she was sacked.
So Emily Thornby, who's now the Shadow Attorney General, a more junior role, then a more senior shadow cabinet role. She took a picture in doing a by-election of a guy with a white van outside his house and a Union flag flying on a flagpole, and it was seen as sneering. She would say it wasn't, but it was seen as sneering enough that my old boss Ed Miliband sacked her within half an hour. Sitting at my desk, he was.
Of course he did.
I never saw him as angry as he was then.
She posted it looking down her nose at this person.
Absolutely. Everybody bar Emily thought it was sneering.
And wasn't it the day of a big football match or something?
I think
something like that.
So we've got now on your, if you're a Labour Party member, you now have the flag, the Union Jack flag, on your membership card.
Very good.
Not just behind you at every press conference, but it's in your membership card.
And because you know what I think, we live in a country with enormous diversity, with every single nation under the sun now lives here. Fine, great. In order to not be divided constantly, we need to unite under something.
Do you remember in the 80s there was that phrase?
Why is that not about uniting under being British and having the privilege of living in this country that we all have?
Totally. Well, in the 80s there was that phrase, there ain't no black in the Union Jack, and I think we'd got over that we actually saw it as not a divisive symbol, but as a symbol of unity. And we're not like the Americans, we're subtle, we don't want to have it absolutely everywhere. We don't want to feel you have to wear it on your lapel badge. Wear it if you want, fly it if you want.
But why is he now going to have a big fight to have the poppy on the grill of his cab? The poppy, which is all about honouring the fallen generations and generations. The poppy fields of
But you
Flanders.
do see that in the front of London, black London cabs all the time. So Shropshire, stop being daft.
Yeah, but we checked. It's because I thought, which political party is running this insane council? It's it's called the administration group. It's an independent lot.
You can't blame our lot.
I was going to.
No, I know, but you can't. I'll get my membership card out and wave it at you.
Yes, well, quite.
But actually, this next story thematically is along the similar lines, isn't it? This is the cellist who performed at the wedding of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and he was interviewed on, I think it was a Radio 4 programme. Am I right, Emma? You might know. And Sheku Kane Mason, and he said that he is uncomfortable hearing Rule Britannia played at the proms. Did he elaborate on why?
So he performed at the proms and he left before Rule Britannia was sung. He has, to be fair, because I immediately had the same reaction, this is outrageous if he doesn't want to take part in such a wonderful British tradition, a rousing British tradition as the last night of the proms. Don't take part, don't get involved. He does talk about there are lots of other British folk music, there's lots of other great British folk music that we could play. He says the last night of Rule Britannia makes him feel uncomfortable. But you do start to... It's a tradition, and the proms are a great British tradition.
Yes.
And you do wonder where on earth we go with this. If we're not allowed to play Rule Britannia...
Yeah.
You know, let's just get rid of the proms altogether.
It's a fantastic atmosphere in there that night, and nobody's being racist or pejorative.
You don't have to take everything literally.
It's just a
We're
good
not
old thing.
saying we want to rule the world.
Exactly.
I went to the last night as a guest of the BBC 20-odd years ago, and I can see where he's coming from, in that it's not that it shouldn't be played. I don't believe it should stop being played. It is quite a sort of... It is a very traditional atmosphere when people play it, but let people... You know, at that moment, the last, you know, the medley of songs
People only know
at the end.
2 lines of it. Rule Britannia, Britain rules. That's all they know.
I can see how it might not have been his vibe, to use the phrase that the kids use, but I don't know why you would walk out once you've been agreed to play.
Yeah.
Why you wouldn't stay to the end? It just seems that if you're going to agree to play and have that honour, that you would just accept it.
Where do you go next with this? You see, next they'll come after pantomimes because of their politically incorrect and some of the stereotypes that use it. I mean, where do we go with all of this, Matthew?
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, you know,
it
ends with, you know, the not being able to show the Dan Busters film because of the now inappropriate name of the dog.
Exactly.
But I think, Emma, for me, it's about the idea that the lines of that song, you know, Britain never, never, never shall be slaves. Rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves. It's a powerful song about this country.
It is powerful, and what really depresses me is that we have to take everything so literally, that we can't just say, actually, this is a song that was written at a very different time, celebrating a very different era. We are not saying that we want to go and make the rest of the world slaves, that we want to subjugate them under our heels. It's the fact that we're losing all nuance, all subtlety, all sense of tradition, all pride,
the Britain
and
rules
bravery.
We don't have a navy.
I was going to say, Penny Mordaunt has been saying it's ironic. Exactly. 2 pages further on in the page in the paper, it's Penny Mordaunt saying the navy hasn't got any ships to be able to save us.
We haven't got any sailors to put on them.
And this is a time when we're trying to recruit more people into the armed forces, and we're not allowed to be proud of our country. I watched an old war film yesterday,
and apparently one convoy to be sent to Malta in the war had more ships in it than we now have in the entire Royal Navy.
That's right. And that was to give them food because they got the George.
We can't even get a ferry from the Isle of Wight on a wavy day. Emma, boarding schools allowing...
Oh my goodness, right. If I was at boiling point before...
Explain to our viewers what
this is. If your child was at this school...
No.
If your child was at this
school... I would be removing my child instantly.
Yeah.
Go on,
good Lord. So you may have heard of a couple of boarding schools there in Hampshire, Bedales and Taunton. They charge around £14,000 a term.
God, so that's £42,000 a year?
A year. That's just for, you know, boarding and education. Don't worry about the rest of it.
That's before we...
Basically, they are allowing their trans pupils...
Don't laugh. It's not funny you're putting that on.
Can we let Emma finish?
They are allowing their trans pupils to stay in the dormitories of their preferred gender, of their chosen gender. To me, this sounds like an absolute recipe for mayhem.
And what age are they allowing this to start from?
This is...
They're boarding, they're probably from 13.
I think it's 11, 12. I think it's the teenage years. Look, adolescence is a time of sort of emotional turbulence and torrent and all sorts of identities and feelings and emotions. The idea that children have to kind of assign themselves to a different gender and then get to stay in the other dormitory. I don't think that's safe. I don't think that's fair on other pupils. If I was a parent there, I would be immediately removing
But now Bev
my
thinks
child.
if the parent complains, the parents will be too scared to complain.
Well, the government guidance is, you know, is going through the motions at the moment. We've had a lot of talk about this recently.
You and I wouldn't, Emma, because we're not that kind of parent. But unfortunately, we're living in an era, Matthew, where the adults no longer impose borders or rules or boundaries on children, and therefore the children are feeling all at sea. All at sea. All the metaphors this today, haven't we? And the idea that they would be just indulged, so that when children come up with a fanciful idea that maybe a lot of the time it's because they're gay, and actually rather than just saying, yeah, well, you're gay, no big deal, they say, oh, well, maybe you're not in the right body
or Bev, that it's fashionable.
Well, I think that's the key point. I think the thing about this is
it's groupthink.
It's groupthink, but also it can be exploited because if all you have to do is say you identify it, this is the self-identification issue which we've seen in Scotland is such a, you know, in a wider context is a bigger issue. Is if you just want to say today I'm feeling I'm in a different gender, then that's a way you can get into the girls' dormitory, which, you know, the lads have been trying to do for years in boarding schools, where you know, as it were. But at least there have been protections in place. I mean, I actually think I slightly disagree. I think this will actually there'll be pushback against this because I think it's a legal minefield. Because it seems to go against the government guidance, and also the first time anything happens.
But Matthew, there's the point. You said government guidance. It's not government rules.
And I'm not sure that the government guidance even applies to private schools because because it's a directive from the Department for Education.
But that was always my slight problem.
No, this does now clash with government guidance, which states that pupils must sleep in dorms segregated by their biological sex. And please, can we just be serious about protecting single-sex spaces?
But why has the government only made it guidance? Because they didn't want to legislate, because they knew it would get bogged down in the House of Lords. The Labour Party would probably tear it asunder.
No, because the Labour Party's against self-identification.
Are you?
Yes.
Well, you wobbled a bit.
I know that Keir made a bit of a fool of himself. Well, the Scottish Party is independent and does its own thing.
And Keir Starmer still doesn't. Keir Starmer think one woman in every 1,000 has a penis.
Able to define in one sentence what a woman is.
Right. Why did it take him so long to work
Look, I think that was a communications disaster that he did, and frankly, I think it was slightly embarrassed straight man doing it. Wes Streeting, who's gay, who's the Shadow Health Secretary, was able to define what a woman was instantly because he
straight man find embarrassing. You should have more idea.
More experience, but I think he was worried about offending the LGBTQ+.
But also, I think this is really doing children a disservice because we are, Bev, exactly as you say, we're bringing them up in a really confusing atmosphere when everything is questioned. But also, we're failing to say, OK, these are your feelings, let's talk about this. Are you know, maybe they're gay, maybe they're just going through what we go through as teenagers.
I still think
the idea of introducing teenage boys into a girls' dormitory or the other way is a recipe for disaster and very unsafe.
You've got gay kids, both boys and girls in those dormitories, and they don't have sex with the people in there. But I mean, that's just I'm just being pushing back.
Well, they shouldn't be having sex before they're 16 anyway.
No, absolutely, it's illegal.
And is sex not? Is it permitted in boarding schools?
No.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what happens in sixth form when it's legal. I don't know.
Even if
I'm not posh enough to have gone to a boarding school.
No, but as a teenage girl, you don't want boys in your single-sex spaces.
Of course you don't.
But I can tell you that generation, unless they are being brought up to be very strong-minded, they will go with the flow, and they, as you say, this idea of offended.
It's the group thing.
The pupils won't want to.
It's like this ludicrous school who's saying they can't provide cat litter for pupils who are identifying as cats.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not funny, is it, really? That's the problem. It's not funny,
But it does tip into the realms of comedy because it is absolutely ludicrous.
You just keep saying you couldn't make this up, and yet this is the future we are wandering towards.
His child is at a boarding school, agrees on the phone saying, you're not doing this to my kids, are you?
Yeah, and interestingly, one of the schools in the article which quoted that it has a policy of doing this says that that's out of date and it actually doesn't do it now, which is not the ones Emma mentioned, but it's Christ Hospital in Sussex. So they seem to have... Common sense seems to have prevailed there.
Right, still to come. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, he's dropped out of the 2024 presidential race 7 months after a rocky start, and he's endorsed, guess who? Donald Trump.
This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. Storm Isha brought some very wet and windy weather across the UK last night, but it will gradually be moving away. However, it will still leave a very windy day through Monday. Plenty of blustery showers pushing in from the west, these likely to be heaviest across Northern Ireland and into parts of Scotland. And for Scotland, we could even see some wintry showers across the high ground. The best of the sunshine across the south and the east through Monday afternoon, and temperatures here we could reach 10 or 11 degrees. But with some strong northwesterly winds, that will take the edge off the temperatures for all of us. Through the rest of Monday, those showers continue to push in from the west, turning particularly heavy across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland. But they will gradually start to ease from the southwest, so turning a little bit drier here through later on Monday and into the early hours of Tuesday morning. So there will be some clear spells and a bit of a drier start to Tuesday itself. A chillier night compared to Sunday night, temperatures widely dropping in the low to mid-single figures, perhaps a little milder across the very far southwest, but we could even see a touch of frost across parts of Scotland. Those drier conditions to start on Tuesday don't last long as this next system pushes in from the west through the day on Tuesday, bringing some particularly heavy rain to Northern Ireland, western parts of Scotland, into northwest England and Wales as well, which could lead to some further flooding after we've already seen that rain from Storm Isha. Strong winds will also accompany this, as well as those mild temperatures, so temperatures generally remaining above average for the time of year.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Now, coming up, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has warned the government has encouraged a desperate culture war.
I'm not sure that's this government. Hasn't Labour done as much to encourage the culture war?
Well, I wish the Tories had done something about it, but they haven't done enough.
Don't go anywhere. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the exasperated People's Channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Morning, 11 a.m. on Monday, the 22nd of January. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
So, tackling BBC bias, the government has set out tougher scrutiny of the broadcaster to deal with perceived problems with impartiality. Lucy Fraser is the Culture Secretary. She said this morning.
What I'm interested in is what audiences say. And what we know from statistics from Ofcom is that audiences are feeling like the BBC is not performing that role in relation to impartiality.
And a boost for Donald Trump. The Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has dropped out of the presidential race and he's endorsed Trump.
Winston Churchill once remarked that success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. While this campaign has ended, the mission continues.
And Fergie's cancer shock. The Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, reveals that she's got skin cancer just months after being treated for breast cancer.
And today marks 100 years since the first ever Labour government was elected. Looks like Sir Keir Starmer, he's now a leader in waiting this morning, by the way, because he's accused the Tories of waging war on charities and civic society. Let's take a listen.
Waging a war on the proud spirit of service in this country isn't leadership. It's desperate, it's divisive, it's damaging. And it comes to something when the Tories are at war with the national trust.
You'd think, wouldn't you, on the 100th anniversary of the first ever Labour government, Ramsay MacDonald, the Keir Starmer would be talking about tax or equality or distributing wealth. He's talking about the National Trust, a very middle-class charity.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it?
His priorities are hopeless.
We'll look a little bit more at what he's been saying this morning. Let us know your thoughts this morning, gbviews at gbnews.com. First, though, here is Tatiana Sanchez in the GB Newsroom.
Bev Turner, thank you. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The most severe wind warnings have passed after Storm Isha brings gusts of up to 107 miles per hour to Scotland, disrupting airlines and cutting power supplies. Northern Ireland Electricity Network said 40,000 customers are now without power. Commuters across the country have been facing travel disruption this morning, with all ScotRail trains suspended until after the morning rush hour. A Met Office yellow warning for strong wind remains in place until midday, with warnings with gusts of up to 80 miles per hour in exposed coastal areas. Police are urging people to avoid travel unless absolutely necessary. Ofcom will gain more powers over BBC online services, including its news website, as parts of changes unveiled by the government. Reforms aimed at improving impartiality at the broadcaster could allow the regulator to enforce action over articles it doesn't believe meet certain standards. Currently, Ofcom's only able to issue an opinion on the matter. However, government recommendations say it'll be given increased oversight over the BBC's online public services, including its news site and YouTube channel. The Prime Minister says BBC News is not immune to scrutiny.
Impartiality is an important tenet of our media industry, and that's why I think all elements of the media industry have to be subject to the same impartiality rules. I think it's what people would expect, and that's what makes our media institutions so great. We have a free and fair press, and impartiality is at the heart of what makes the BBC a strong institution.
The Duchess of York says she's in shock but in good spirits after being diagnosed with skin cancer. Sarah Ferguson says she's taking some time to herself after having several moles removed, with one being identified as cancerous. It's just months after undergoing treatment for breast cancer. She's thanked well-wishers and medical staff for the support that she's been given. Labour's accusing the government of turning a blind eye to what it's calling corruption after new data shows water bosses are pocketing millions of pounds despite overseeing illegal sewage spills. Figures show water chiefs have received more than £10 million in bonuses and almost £15 million in incentives since the last general election. It's also received just over £621,000 in benefits. Earlier on GB News, the Shadow Environment Secretary Steve Reid was asked what Labour would do if it was in power.
You're meant to get a bonus when you're doing a good job, not when you're overseeing failure and illegal behaviour, and yet this is what's going on. Your question was how can we deal with that problem? Well, what we would do is we would amend the Water Industry Act to give the regulator, Ofwat, the power they need to ban water bosses paying themselves bonuses while they are responsible for severe and repeated levels of illegal sewage discharge into our waterways.
British farmers are calling on MPs to support tougher regulations to protect them from what they're calling unfair treatment by the so-called Big Six supermarkets. A dozen scarecrows have been placed outside of Parliament as MPs will debate reforms to the grocery supply chain. It's after 110,000 people signed a petition urging the government to overhaul the grocery supplies code of practice. Riverford Organic, who started that petition, say the scarecrows represent farmers who claim they could go out of business in the next 12 months, blaming supermarkets' buying practices. Millions of parents in England are being urged to book measles jabs for their children amid a growing risk of outbreaks across the country. Officials say the decline in maintaining routine childhood vaccinations is concerning. It's after the UK Health Security Agency declared a national incident, confirming 216 cases and 103 probable cases in the West Midlands since October. A vaccine catch-up scheme will target all parents of children aged 6 to 11, urging them to make an appointment for any missed MMR jabs. And Donald Trump has described Republican rival Ron DeSantis as a really terrific person after he ended his presidential campaign and endorsed the former Prime Minister. His surprise announcement comes ahead of this week's New Hampshire Republican primary, where Mr. DeSantis was polling in the single digits. Trump also said he wanted to thank DeSantis and said he looks forward to working with him. His departure leaves Nikki Haley as Mr. Trump's only significant rival. Those are your top stories on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining us. 7 minutes past 11. What's the weather like where you are? It's actually rather lovely in London now. Blue skies, no wind, quite warm. Shall we see what you've been saying at home? Keir Starmer's been talking this morning, by the way. We are going to come to that in just a moment.
Even more thrilling than his usual speeches, let me tell you. You'd be amazed what he's talking about.
We've been talking about the fact that the BBC are going to be under a little more scrutiny, how much more remains to be seen, by Ofcom to apparently be more impartial. We heard Lucy Fraser saying on GB News this morning that the audience complaints is that the BBC is not sufficiently
And they're also going to get more
impartial.
involved in complaints because the perception is at the moment they deal with their own complaints.
They do.
How impartial is, how objective is that?
I complained to the BBC last year, you know. Never heard anything. Do you know what it was? I was watching the breakfast show with my daughter and they were showing some footage of somebody that was hit by a car. And they were talking over this story about, you know, blah, 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 and this pedestrian was hit by a car, and they showed the person walking, and then they actually showed the moment of impact of
That's
this car.
really appalling. I'm surprised
and
at that.
my 11-year-old at the time, she visibly flinched, and it was really distressing to watch. They didn't say any
and no
sort
warning
of warning.
It was coming.
Nothing. And for her sake, I then complained via the BBC's website to say that was not OK to show that person being hit.
You won't have been the only person to have complained.
It was really disturbing. It was quite early, 7 o'clock in the morning or so. Never heard anything, of course. We will refer this to our complaints department.
Yeah.
But now, hopefully...
Which is the black hole of Calcutta.
Exactly. Now, hopefully, people will be held to account for those sorts of editorial decisions. Adrian has said many of my friends and I are pensioners. We're fortunate enough to be in receipt of a work-related pension, but that puts us in the invidious position of being hit by a stealth tax, whereby our tax-free allowance is decreased. We've paid national insurance contributions. Why are pensioners with a private pension the only people who lose their statutory tax-free alliance. A lot of you getting in touch about the licence fee.
Well, don't forget as well, the free licence for people over 75 was abolished. And the deal was...
That's right.
It was a deal done with George Osborne, Slippery George, when he was Chancellor, that the BBC would make reforms and cut back and cut back. Didn't do anything of the sort.
No. And this idea that Labour, well, as I said, we're going to tell you in just a moment what Keir Starmer's been saying this morning. Patricia says Labour against private schools. We're talking about it's never. Starmer and most of Labour MPs went to and sent their children to private, even boarding schools. They attempt to say they are humble toolmaker beginnings while they attended themselves. They're just hypocrites. And also on the idea that boarding schools are allowing transgender children to sleep in the dorm of the gender of which they identify.
And on Starmer, just in context, he was at a state school that became a private school, and he stayed in the private system.
Oh, is that right?
So he benefited from a private education.
Did not know that.
And this is a man who's now going to put 20% tax on every private school in the country. That won't affect, in my view, people who send their kids to Eton and
it will not.
Millfield and some of the really big Cheltenham Ladies' College.
It will not.
Well, it'll affect them, but it won't mean they've got to take them out. 'Cause if you can afford to pay $60,000 a year, it will affect the smaller private schools, people who aspire to send their kids to the local private.
That's right.
Some of those are going to close. Talk that it could be 40,000, 50,000 kids we've taken out of the private sector. They're going to go in the state sector. Who's going to pay for that, Sir Keir?
Well, Sir Keir Starmer gave a speech this morning. He said that Labour is on the side of the National Trust and the Royal National Lifeboat Institution as he accuses the Tories of waging war on charities and civic society. Have a listen.
Waging a war on the proud spirit of service in this country isn't leadership. It's desperate, it's divisive, it's damaging. And it comes to something when the Tories are at war with the National Trust. That's what happens when politics of self-preservation prevail over commitment to service.
Now, Phil, we should clarify what it means about the Tories being at war with the National Trust, an institution that we all hold dear. I have my membership.
Yeah,
He's talking about the fact that some exhibits at the National Trust were very, how do we phrase it? Some people would use the word woke.
Well, and what they've done, if you go into a lot of National Trust houses, they've got a great big history about the colonial past of the owner of the house. Some of these exhibits are a result of colonial trade. Ridiculous, frankly ridiculous, and it's provoked big problems in the National Trust. There's people trying to get on the board to challenge all this. It is wokery.
And the National Trust would say, we want to put that into some sort of historical context, and we want to explain how in 2024 making your money out of slavery might be frowned upon.
And do you remember there was the row about the National Trust volunteers being required to wear the rainbow flags on some
pride badges?
Pride badges, and they said we don't want to, and they shouldn't have to. Why should they? That's the wokery that the Tories have been attacking, but Keir Starmer thinks is fine.
Well, joining us now from Westminster is our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Good morning, Catherine. What else did Sir Keir Starmer have to say this morning?
Yes, good morning, Andrew and Bev. To be fair to Keir Starmer, although obviously those comments are going to get a lot of pickup, that was only a very small section of a speech that went on for some 10 to 15 minutes. He was speaking to faith leaders, community leaders and charities in London, giving a couple of messages, really. One, paying tribute to people who volunteer, who give their time to the community, saying what a huge role they play and how essential that work is, and the work of charities and church groups and so on. Pointing out, like the Trussell Trust, for instance, excuse me while I put my teeth back in, giving 1 million food parcels this winter, and also saying that Labour wants to encourage, called it a society of service, trying to paint a hopeful picture going forward, and saying that it's part of Labour's plans for getting Britain's future back. That's their slogan. You're going to hear it again and again and again. The other thing that was going on, of course, is it's not far till the election. He was taking a pop at the Conservatives over and over again, saying they had a leader that said there was no such thing as society. Then they had David Cameron talking about the big society, but then austerity came along and he said we ended up with a poor society, saying basically that the Conservatives have been all about the individual, that we've had chaos over the last 14 years and saying that Labour can offer something different. So certainly it will have gone down well in the hall for its intended audience. Lots of well-meaning, sounds fabulous. Of course, putting it into practice, a little bit different, but broad brushstrokes from Sir Keir Starmer this morning.
OK, thank you, Catherine. He's being a little ingenuous on that Margaret Thatcher.
That is outrageous. I'm just thinking out, because it's again and again and again with Mrs Thatcher. What she actually said about society, she says, we've gone through a period where too many children and people have been given to understand, and my God, they think it now. I have a problem. It's the government's job to cope with it. Or I have a problem. I'll go and get a grant to cope with it. I'm homeless. The government must house me. And so they are casting their problems on society. Who is society? There's no such thing. There are individual men and women. There are families. And no government can do everything.
Yeah, that was the Margaret Thatcher.
People have got to look after themselves.
And it was an interview with, I think, Woman's Own magazine or something, wasn't it?
And she's always misrepresented on that. It drives me nuts.
When she says, because she's saying effectively when you say there's no such thing as society, she meant it's taxpayers.
Yes.
It's your money that pay for things, not this nebulous idea
and
of
get
society.
off your backside and sort some of your problems out yourself. It's not the government's job to do everything. I wish people would follow that advice today, because too many do, because ever since the pandemic, handout, how much? How much are you giving me?
Right. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has dropped out of the 2024 presidential race for the Republican Party.
It's good news for Donald Trump, of course.
We can't ask our supporters to volunteer their time and donate their resources if we don't have a clear path to victory. Accordingly, I am today suspending my campaign.
So joining us now is Professor of US Politics for the University College of Dublin, Scott Lucas. Hello, Scott, if you are there with us. Very good morning. Good to see you again. Good to see you again. Was this a surprise that Ron DeSantis has pulled out at this point? He didn't even see it through to the next debate in Hampshire.
No, the writing was on the wall for a few days. If you were looking closely enough, DeSantis was polling only between 6 and 7% in New Hampshire. That not only was behind Donald Trump and Nikki Haley, it was behind a guy named Chris Christie, who dropped out of the race weeks ago. The next primary is in South Carolina, and DeSantis doesn't have much chance there either. So he pulled out to cut his losses and to try to plan to run for president in 2028.
Does this mean, Scott, that it's a slam dunk, to use that terrible American expression? It's a slam dunk now for Trump. He's got the nomination tied up.
Nope. I mean, the U.S. media have been led by the nose by Trump for months, sucking all the oxygen out of the campaign and almost anointing him. But the reality is that Nikki Haley, who in November was only polling at about 14% in New Hampshire, was closing in on 40%. Even Ron DeSantis left the race. If Haley can top 40% next Tuesday, she'll still be second to Trump, but it'll be a strong second. And that takes the race forward into her home state of South Carolina in late February, and then those 14 primaries where 1/3 of the delegates are chosen on March the 5th, what we call Super Tuesday.
What would you say is the difference between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley?
If you actually pay attention to issues rather than the white noise and the attacks, the mudslinging, I think you can see that there's a clear difference, for example, in the question of women's rights and abortions. Trump is very unclear on what he would do. Haley says it should be up to the states. They should be allowed to determine when abortions would take place. On immigration, rather than simply declaring border invasion, which is what Ron DeSantis has done, Nikki Haley has said we have to be tough on the border, but we need a working system. We need a working system of courts to hear immigration cases. We need to have a working border enforcement policy rather than just Trump's wall with Mexico. And on the economy, what she says is that Trump really is very fuzzy. He's very unclear on what he would do economically, and that at this critical time, in America, you actually need a very thought-out approach to maintain steady growth amidst conflicts in Ukraine and in the Middle East.
So he didn't have many votes to gift to Trump, but he's backing Trump now, DeSantis. Is that going to make much difference to Trump's numbers next week in New Hampshire?
Again, because he was only at 6 to 7%, you know, that's not that huge an amount. I think what we're looking at here is really just a question of who turns out. it comes down to that. I think Trump does retain support amidst this base, the very strong supporters of his who like that message, the spectacle. But Haley has gotten a lot of support from those who don't like Trump, and importantly, independents, because non-aligned voters can vote in the Republican primary next Tuesday.
The key will be, before we let you go, Scott, who is most likely to beat Biden? Will Republicans next week in New Hampshire, will they go with their gut instinct, they just love Trump, or will they think who is most likely to beat Biden? And Haley, I gather, currently is ahead of Trump in that respect.
Personally, I hope they would go with competence and responsibility, but you're absolutely right, Andrew. Whereas a race between Trump and Biden is a toss-up, Nikki Haley is 5-6% ahead of Biden, poll after poll. There was a meeting between the two of them.
How's Robert Kennedy Jr. doing now?
There is no Democratic primary in New Hampshire next week, so we really won't get the data there. He's probably around at about 10%, 7 to 10% in the polls. For those who like a lot of the white noise and possibly the Kennedy name, he gets some votes. But his problem is he's too embedded in conspiracy theories. A lot of conspiracy theories, for example, over coronavirus vaccines.
She likes them.
To get credibility.
Scott, she likes them. She likes them. She likes those.
I don't see it as a conspiracy theory. I see that he's done a big, deep dive into... Give me an example. What do you mean by conspiracy theory? I'm interested in that, Scott. What do you mean?
Robert Kennedy actually says that the vaccine is part of a globalist conspiracy involving all the big companies and the World Economic Forum to dictate how we behave, that the vaccines don't actually work.
I think you're slightly misquoting him there, but we probably don't have time to go into it. But thank you, Scott Lucas. Always good to talk to you. Professor of US Politics, University College of Dublin there, Scott Lucas. What do you think a conspiracy theory is?
Well, you know most of them.
There we go. Right, still to come, the Duchess of York has revealed that she's battling an aggressive form of skin cancer just months after being diagnosed with breast cancer.
You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
11:24 with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So Sarah Ferguson has been diagnosed with skin cancer just months after being treated for breast cancer.
The diagnosis comes after she had several cancerous moles removed. A spokesperson for the Duchess said she's undergoing further investigations to ensure it's been caught in the early stages.
So joining us now is our royal commentator Cameron Walker. Good morning, Cameron. It feels like every time you're in here at the moment, we've got some rather sad medical story to discuss. What do we know about this situation?
Yeah, these things clearly come in 3. It looks like, according to the Duchess this morning on Instagram, it's been caught early enough perhaps to be treated. So as we know, she was treated for breast cancer around 6 months ago. As part of that treatment, her dermatologist decided to check a few of her moles, and one of those moles just after Christmas came back that it was indeed skin cancer. So she got that diagnosis, and what the Duchess has confirmed this morning, which was reported in the Telegraph, was that she spent a number of weeks at the Mayor Life Clinic, which is a very prestigious medical clinic in Austria, so she can rest and recuperate. She says it's clearly been a shock that I've had a second diagnosis in the space of a year, but I'm in good spirits. She's now back home in Windsor, resting with her family. But of course, it's the second royal, or someone close to the royal family, even if she isn't indeed a working member of the royal family, who's decided to disclose very private medical details after His Majesty the King less than a week ago.
And it's really important, Cam, because I was looking at this. Skin cancer is one of the fastest growing cancers in this country. It's doubling the number of people getting it every year. And it's because we're exposed to more sun and people don't take proper protection.
Yeah, and according to the NHS, of course, those with redheads and freckles,
and very fair skin.
Yeah, it can increase the chances of getting this particular type.
And we
of
know
skin
she used
cancer.
to bake on the beach, didn't she?
Yeah,
she really did. She really did.
She certainly did, which is why she gets checked regularly, and clearly she has done in this case. And she says actually this morning, my experience underlines the importance of checking the size, shape, colour and texture as the emergence of any new moles, because it can be a sign of melanoma.
And if someone has got a lump and it changes, you should go to your GP. That's the advice.
Absolutely.
If it becomes itchy or weeps or becomes more red.
Absolutely. It's seeking medical advice and getting these things caught early, because if it's caught early, it's far more treatable. And that's what the Duchess has really been talking about this morning, as with the King did last week, saying that check your symptoms out if indeed you have symptoms of enlarged prostate.
And everybody's now on these websites checking about prostate cancer, which is a great benefit of what he's done.
Yeah, absolutely. 11 times more people viewed it the day after his diagnosis than the day before.
Just remind us, Sarah Ferguson still lives with Prince Andrew, doesn't she?
She does indeed, in Royal Lodge in Windsor. They are divorced, but they do live in the same building, a 30-room building. It is a great place. Of course, it's not part of the guarded Windsor estate. Separate police and security have to be paid for, because it's not in that perimeter where Windsor Castle is, Adelaide Cottage, where William and Catherine live. And of course, as we've all heard, there have been talk that perhaps the King, or at least the Crown Estates, who's in charge of that property, is trying to move Andrew into a smaller property in the gardens.
How do they do that? He's got the lease, which he's been paying for.
Yeah,
and he paid for the refurbishments.
But there was also a rumour that they were going to get remarried, and I wondered if that was for property reasons.
Well, there's been a lot of rumours.
They're good mates, but they're not. They don't want that's not going to
They're
happen.
not
I don't think.
romantically
No, not in the slightest.
intertwined
not in the
anymore.
slightest.
No, but I think it shows that the King genuinely is fond of Fergie because he invited her to take part in the Sandringham Christmas Day walk, which would not have happened when Prince Philip was alive. Let's put it that way. First time in 30 years.
I've met her a few times. She can be very, very engaging.
And of course, Beatrice and Eugenie are good friends, genuine friends with William and Catherine, aren't they, as well? So that generation are all close.
Yeah, absolutely. William is first cousins with Beatrice and Eugenie, as is Prince Harry. We understand that Princess Beatrice in particular has Eugenie even has a close relationship with Prince Harry
with him, hasn't she?
Yeah, she has, and even in that Netflix documentary with Harry and Meghan, they disclosed private selfies of each other at a Halloween party, I think it was, before the relationship.
And can we be clear now? Did Harry and Meghan send a message to the King and Catherine wishing them well?
Well, that was an exclusive in the Mirror. It's been dubbed as an olive branch. I have not been able to verify that claim. It wouldn't surprise me if behind the scenes they did indeed do that, but do they really need to send out a press release every
No, they don't.
From a PR point of view, these medical issues are a little complicated for the royal family as well, because, of course, there are those people who, particularly on social media, are saying, well, I've been on a waiting list for a year in the NHS, and there's a sense it's not fair that they get to go to some hospital in Austria and recuperate. It's tricky to manage.
It is tricky to manage, but of course they're not the only family in the world who can go to a private hospital.
No.
There are many thousands who can afford it or indeed have private medical insurance to be able to do so.
I know, and there's always that argument from people who use private medicine, it frees up space on the NHS.
Yeah. OK, thank you, Cameron. Right, still to come. Today marks 100 years since the Labour Party was formed. Are you celebrating that?
It's since their first Labour government,
actually. It's the first Labour government.
Yeah. No, I think we want a good, proper, viable opposition. It's just a shame we got Keir Starmer.
Well, that and much more after your morning's news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you very much. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. We start with some breaking news, and an 84-year-old man has died after the car he was a passenger in crashed into a fallen tree in Fife in Scotland. He was declared dead at the scene. The other occupants in the car were uninjured. Storm Isha has brought gusts of up to 107 miles per hour, disrupting airlines and cutting power supplies. Rishi Sunak says the government's working hard to restore power to homes remaining without it. A Met Office yellow warning for strong wind remains in place until midday, with warnings of gusts of up to 80 miles per hour in exposed coastal areas. Ofcom will gain more powers over BBC online services, including its news website, as part of changes unveiled by the government. Reforms are aimed at improving impartiality at the broadcaster, and they could allow the regulator to enforce action over articles it doesn't believe meet certain standards. Currently, Ofcom's only able to issue an opinion on the matter, but government recommendations say it'll be given increased oversight over the BBC's online services, including its news YouTube channel. The Duchess of York says she's in shock, but in good spirits after being diagnosed with skin cancer. Sarah Ferguson says she's taking some time to herself after having several moles removed, with one being identified as cancerous. It's just months after undergoing treatment for breast cancer. She's thanked well-wishers and medical staff for the support she's been given. And close to 500,000 households will be unable to afford to keep their homes warm this winter following a price cap increase this month. Outra revealed the increase on January 1st led to a 12% rise in households affected by fuel poverty compared to October last year. The researchers found the UK now has 4.29 million households experiencing fuel poverty, up from 3.83 million. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website at gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2713 and 1.1674 euros. The price of gold, £1,591 and 84 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 at 7,467 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Up at midday, good afternoon, Britain, with Emily and Ben Leo this afternoon, nearly 7 morning. How are you both?
Very well.
Right,
Yes, we have Ben with us.
Well, it is the morning, by the way.
It is still morning,
It is
you're
still
right, but
the
they will
morning.
be here for the afternoon, just about. Right, what have you got coming up on the show today, guys?
Well, the big one, of course, BBC bias.
Yes,
midterm
good.
Review by the government into the BBC. It's been accused of, it's been urged that the BBC must adapt or risk losing trust. Some may argue that it's beyond that point by now, of
I mean,
course.
how many times have we heard that from the government
I
and
know.
various ministers? It
I
must
know.
adapt or risk losing trust. Well, we already know that it's lost a lot of trust, so what are they going to do about it? It seems like they're going to beef up Ofcom when it comes to the website and social media. Is that enough?
Yeah, and when Nadine Dorries was Culture Secretary, for not long enough, in my view, she was talking very actively about the licence fee.
But what's
That's no
interesting
threat to that now.
is Labour, of course, have come out and said this is all the Tories just, wanting to make a culture war out of this, and this is total distraction from the real things that are happening in this country. And they make a good point there. Perhaps it is. Perhaps the Conservatives like us to focus on the BBC rather than other matters. But
You say that, but I've been doing some research this morning in examples of BBC bias, which the Culture Secretary struggled with this morning, for some reason.
Yeah, she thought she might have done her homework.
As one example, there was that infamous FOI, Freedom of Information request, a few years ago, about which newspapers the BBC bought and stocked its buildings with.
Guardian.
What was number one? The Guardian.
I know.
Yeah.
I
So what does that
might
tell
have been
you?
involved with that FOI, actually.
Since then, though, they've been ordering more copies of the Mail.
Yeah.
So,
If they want a better programme out, but buy the Mail, 'cause there's better ideas in there.
Yeah, better stories there, perhaps,
Much
than
better.
the Guardian. The Guardian has a very small readership, doesn't it?
So you've been looking at what Keir Starmer said in a bit more detail. We managed to touch upon it this morning, but what else was in his amazing speech? 100 years to the day since we had the first Labour government.
And he's banging on about the RSPCA. Don't you think he could have talked about the achievements of Labour and what he would do as Prime Minister, but he's going on about the RSPCA? It's pathetic.
Well, we're not going to get anything concrete from Keir Starmer at this stage, are we?
Well,
He's going to leave it as long as possible so that there isn't time for all of us to scrutinise his plans.
It's working, isn't it, Emily? Because how far are they ahead in the latest poll? 27 points ahead in that.
I always say he just needs to do a Joe Biden and hide away in his basement until election day. Just don't say anything stupid if you want to win the election.
Yeah.
And that's what he's doing.
And talking of Biden, we will, of course, be reflecting on Ron DeSantis leaving the race.
Bev, your heart broke.
I'm gutted.
Yeah.
You're probably a little gutted, are you, Ben? Do you
I was a massive fan of DeSantis around a year ago when he was golden boy. He could do no wrong. He was saying all the right things. I think he had a pretty shoddy campaign and...
It wasn't Trump.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think he should have run at all. He should have waited until 2028 when Trump would have, if he wins this year, Trump would have handed the reins over to him potentially.
All that money.
I know.
$200 million.
Right, all that and more. Emily, yet again, we've matched our dresses accidentally. This was not planned. Right, a lot more this afternoon. You are watching Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
What is the time?
Very good morning,
11:40.
11:40. So we are joined now by former Labour advisor Matthew Larser and author and broadcaster Emma Wolf in the studio. Can we first talk? We have so many great stories to talk to you about.
This is an bursting. This is an historic moment. 100 years ago today, we had our first Labour government formed by Ramsay MacDonald. We're going to talk now to Olivia Rutley, our political correspondent.
Oh, no, here she is.
Here she is now.
I appeal to you to give us, during this transition time, a government that will be a union of all parties.
It's been 100 years since the country heeded Ramsay MacDonald's plea and elected the first ever Labour government. The party was founded in 1900, having grown out of the trade union movement and socialist parties of the 19th century. But it wasn't until 24 years later that they garnered public approval and gained power. And spells in the cold soon became commonplace for Labour. After MacDonald's government fell in 1935, Labour was out on its ear until Winston Churchill formed the wartime coalition, making Clement Attlee the first Deputy Prime Minister. Much to the surprise of Churchill and his allies, Attlee then won a landslide in 1945 on a manifesto that sounds very like something we might hear from a Labour politician today.
The crucial question of this election, on which every elector must make up his or her mind, is this: what kind of society do you want?
Attlee's legacy lives on in the form of the National Health Service, which he managed to create despite World War II leaving Britain virtually bankrupt. After two short spells in government in the 1960s and 70s, under James Callaghan and Harold Wilson, Labour came back with a bang in 1997 with the first Blair landslide. Tony Blair brought the party closer to the political centre and abolished its commitment to mass nationalisation of industry. Blair also reversed his party's policy on unilateral nuclear disarmament, and the events of Black Wednesday allowed Labour to promise better economic management under the chancellorship of Gordon Brown. After 3 consecutive election wins and then a stint of falling popularity, Blair made way for Gordon Brown, who governed for just 3 years before losing to the Conservatives in the 2010 election. Labour has been out in the wilderness ever since and endured a spell of bitter division under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership between 2015 and 2019, with a number of MPs leaving the party for good. 5 years on from Corbyn's departure, and the party is almost unrecognisable. Now Keir Starmer hopes to make history by overturning the Conservatives' 54-seat majority and securing a landslide Labour victory.
We are ready for a general election. I've had my whole team on a general election footing for some time now.
Could 2024, like 1924, be Labour's lucky year? Olivia Utley, GB News.
Well, we're watching that gripped, aren't we?
Harumphing. I was harumphing the whole way through it.
It is fascinating. Thank you, Olivia Utley. We've got Emma Wolfe and Matthew Laza still here with us. Were you as gripped by that?
Well, I think it's more, you know, for me, it's a celebration of our history and a lesson from our history that, you know, we spent too long of it in opposition in the last 100 years.
There might be a reason for that.
Why haven't they... Why, today of all days, didn't Keir Starmer have a block-busting speech, trailed in all the Sunday papers, talking about what Labour has achieved, the creation of the welfare state, all the things they've done and what they're going to do instead. A carping, silly speech going on about the Tories and the RSPCA. Yeah. It's low rents.
Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised because so this is the 100th anniversary of the first Labour government. Yeah. When we had the 100th anniversary of the party's formation.
Yeah. By Keir Hardie.
By Keir Hardie, and there's sort of then Tony Blair did a massive event at the Old Vic Theatre. Celebrities were out. It was all kind of. There was a centenary logo that went on the party membership card. This seems a bit low-key. It may be because Ramsay MacDonald then went on to betray the party, so it might be a bit...
This feels like, as someone who works in news, this feels like a massive missed opportunity.
Absolutely.
I didn't even know about this until I was reading the papers this morning, and it's sort of low down. It's not front page.
Really poor.
Look, Labour are on a roll. Lots of us, even me, are kind of resigning ourselves to the fact that they're probably going to get in later on this year. Sure. This could have been a moment to really kind of put themselves out there and make people feel that they're ready for government.
We saw images of the young Tony Blair there. There was an excitement in that man.
Absolutely. Well, there's a picture of me, which one day we'll see, when I had hair standing next to him when he was elected leader of the party, and you can't barely recognise me because I had
in
hair.
97?
In 94 when he was elected leader of the party.
I was outside his house.
But what they should have been doing is a big thing to make Labour and Britain the story together, to make out that Labour's story is Britain's story over the last century. So that's what I would have been advising if I'd been in the comms chair.
But of course, they daren't, because they just think we'll keep our head down, we won't say anything controversial.
I'm not sure, because the speech he's done today is quite controversial.
But why is it controversial at all, just to say 100 years of Labour?
Yeah.
Because, why is it controversial? Because what I would want to see as a potential voter is, OK, that's what you've done for 100 years, so tell me now what the next 100 years under Labour will look like. I think that's what they dare not do.
I think that's too subtle. I think that's too subtle. I think 100 years of Labour, a big speech, a big gala, something like that.
And crucially, with members.
Make us feel that Starmer's on and up, that it's all positive and that they're ready for government.
And he could tell
Simple as that.
He could tell us who his favourite Labour leader is. You would assume
it'll be Attlee. It's always got to be Attlee.
Just a celebration of Labour.
Yeah. But, you know, it's Attlee, then Blair has to be the older person. But the other thing is, you should be doing the speech with Labour members, because the poor old membership feel a little bit neglected occasionally.
It's in front of a bank.
It's for the Lloyds Bank Foundation logo. So I'm a little perplexed about the choice. The team is normally spot on, but today I think they might have got
a nice corporate future with Labour in power.
Exactly. I would have been, you know, outside London with members.
People don't like that.
Fresh from Davos.
Right, can we just talk? Can we please, just for my own sake, can we talk about Catherine Birbal's?
Otherwise you're going to explode.
This is my daily therapy, because I am going to explode. You might have been with us last week. We were talking about this story. She runs the Michaela Community School in London. They have the best results for children that arrive at the school in year 7, so age 11, and then leave. They are top of the leaderboard for the academic improvement of those children. And she's in court this week, Emma. Now, if you did see, this is because she's banned Muslim prayer. She's banned any prayer to bring together this incredibly multicultural school.
And to keep order, and to maintain stability, and to stop this horrible divisiveness, the threats. The pupil that is bringing this case against her, funded by lawyers, very aggressive lawyers, was actually...
hang on, funded by you and me, the taxpayers. They've got wretched legal aid.
Yeah, legal aid. This student was actually suspended for 5 days last year for threatening another pupil with stabbing. What Catherine Birbal's saying... What she's actually saying is, do you know what? We don't have space for separate prayer areas. She said it's not safe for pupils to be wandering around the school unsupervised, to go off and have prayer sessions. I agree with her. I think that schools should be a neutral space, politics-free, religion-free. They should get on with the job of schools, which is educating children. And that's what she's doing.
And she's facing death threats. She's had staff who've had bricks put through their windows.
I mean, in France, of course, it would be the exact reverse. Because of the secularism in France, she would be sued if she had let them
I don't even want young girls wearing face coverings, I don't think.
And obviously, we've seen some horrific examples in France where we saw the beheading of a teacher who'd got involved in controversy from showing the Charlie Hebdo cartoons of the Prophet. So, I mean, look, I think we should keep religion out of schools unless it's a specifically religious school. I'm not in favour of banning religious schools, but if it's a state school, it should be secular. I mean, frankly, when I was at my secondary school, the daily prayer amounted to a prayer. Daily act of Christian worship was a prayer stuck on the notice board that everybody ignored. And then when we were 17, we thought it was very, very big of us to not sing Christian in Onward Christian Soldiers. That was our rebellion.
What did you omitted that word?
Yeah, we just went onward. Soldiers marching us to war.
Catherine Birbalsingh, where she's so remarkable, and she calls herself, she says, I'm a small C conservative. She's at Payne. She's done a brilliant interview with a media outlet called Unheard, and I would urge you to sit down and listen to it with a guy called Freddie Sayers. And she talks about the fact that across the school, they have so many different faiths. And therefore, I have to bring people together. And she said, if you don't do that proactively, she said, in my school, the Caribbean boys would be separate to the Indian boys, would be separate to the Muslim boys, and the Sikh girls and the Hindu girls. They were in their little ghettos.
And then different traditions within those religions.
And what are schools about? It is becoming chaotic. It is becoming impossible to manage, and it is becoming impossible for them to do their jobs, which is educating the children.
And she said, if you don't proactively make an effort to bring those people together and you all make sacrifices, then the cohesion does not work. And where is there a lesson for life in that?
And how successful has that school been in getting its
The
most?
And they are way oversubscribed.
Look, I'm very anti-discrimination, but if nobody's allowed to pray, then that works for me.
Exactly.
Yeah, she's not.
Exactly.
She's not.
That's the crucial distinction.
And parents are responding with their feet because everybody wants to go to this school.
And I'm sorry, if the Muslim families felt this strongly about it, why couldn't they have crowdfunded this? Why have the taxpayer got to pay for this?
Absolutely. You actually find, for example, that a lot of Church of England schools have relatively high numbers of people from other faiths because parents from other faiths who are religious like a religious ethos in a school.
They do.
Fine, tick. You know what you're getting. But if you know what you're getting when you sign up for this school, it's a secular school. There's no prayer. Period.
I spoke at an assembly in a Catholic school, junior school, a few weeks ago, and half the kids were not Catholic. And it's a great school, and there's a
and you know what you're getting,
queue for people to get in school.
And parents, it does what it says on the tin, doesn't it? And that's the key thing. You know what you're getting.
Right. This story broke over the weekend, and I was dying to talk about it. I hope we've got time before Emily and Ben appear on our screens. But this is about Channel migrants who have been quietly given the right to work.
What have I been saying? What have I been saying?
You've been saying this should happen. Well, guess what? It already was happening.
OK, well, I'm going to disagree with all of you for once, because I actually think I would prefer, given that the government have completely failed to deter people from crossing over illegally and that they've failed to process their claims, I actually would prefer migrants to be working here in some sectors.
I agree.
I'm with you.
Yeah, no,
I think I would.
I'm the only one who doesn't agree with
I'm happy for them to work in agriculture and construction. I don't want them in the care sector. I'm not sure that's safe.
Get the turnips out the field.
Yes, absolutely. Do some work. Don't sit on benefits. Don't commit crime. Let's get them to set them to
The
work.
government's
What they
made
do
it
in
worse
America.
by keeping it secret. I think that's the problem. Is it only came out as an
if they're getting free board and lodge in these camps and these hotels, in return they do some basic work.
So if they work in one of these shortage sectors, they have to. They don't get the subsistence allowance stops because they're being paid, and they have to contribute towards their board and lodge.
But they don't get wages on top. They get that subsistence already, and they should.
They get 80% of the going wage.
They should be going wage. But the key, politically, so today the development is that James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, has been warned by former cabinet ministers David Davis and I think Robert Jenrick as well to ditch this scheme. So it may not last long if there's pressure builds in the Tory.
No, I think it'd be quite.
Probably ministers didn't even know.
But we're doing the people trafficking work for them because then they.
You think this is a pull factor?
Guess what, guys? Not only do you get to go to England, we put you in a hotel. They're going to give you a job as well.
No, I think it's far more of a pull factor. Look, guys, come over here and you'll sit on benefits and have everything provided to you.
Rather than picking veg.
No, I don't think it is a pull factor.
They do want to work.
But I think this gives good. Well, I think it gives people a chance. Lots of people will get back on their feet. They will start to contribute to this country. We cannot have people over here just sitting on benefits.
Totally agree. It's only after a year.
But that is when you should be processing them.
Yes, ideally they should.
But given that we are where we are, the government have failed. Then yes, let them work.
1,000 new people to process the applications and get people who shouldn't be here home.
Out of interest, why do you not think they should work in the care homes?
That's just a safety thing. I'm not sure I would want someone who is an asylum seeker whose claim hasn't been processed. I know that's sort of... I'm just not sure whether that is safe.
It's the key thing is it hasn't been processed, isn't it? You don't know, you don't know who they are. If somebody's allowed to stay, of course,
you are working with
if we had a better screening system, fine. But,
which is what we will have.
They are often working with very vulnerable people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so has
with
to be
older
careful.
people with
Blimey, almost agreement there.
Almost.
3 against. It's normally me. It's 3 against 1.
I think we've convinced Bev. I think Bev's for turning.
No, I don't think so, because I don't want to give us another reason for people to be able to sell the idea of...
No, but they won't. It's more of a sell to come over here and live for free.
We don't want them here at all, let's be clear. Any of them.
And on that bombshell...
Crossing the channel.
Right,
not
that's
one
it
of them.
from Britain's Newsroom this morning. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Matthew. As always, we will be back tomorrow morning at 9:30. But up next, it's Good Afternoon Britain with Ben and Emily.
See you tomorrow.
Yes, well, we have the wonderful Ben Leo with us today on the show. And I think I'm Team Bev on that last debate. That one gets me going. But coming up on the show...
Big stories to come. Of course, the BBC midterm review. Is the BBC biased? The Culture Secretary struggled to give examples this morning. We'll be joined by Michael Crick, veteran broadcaster, and I'll put a long list of examples to him to respond to. Yes,
that's going to be a spicy one. And Storm Aisha, have you been impacted? Winds, gusts of up to 100 miles per hour. My windows were shaking, and that was in London. Let us know, gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, your weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Storm Isha has cleared away, but it's still very windy out there. A mixture of sunshine and blustery showers. The storm system, as I said, clearing away to the north. There is another low, though, out in the Atlantic that will bring more wet and windy weather through tomorrow. And there are further Met Office warnings in place for that. For the rest of today, it remains very gusty. The winds coming in from the west, bringing plenty of showers across western Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England and West Wales. The odd rumble of thunder is possible. Not too many of those showers getting to the Midlands, Eastern England, parts of northeast Scotland staying dry and bright with some sunny spells. And even where we've got the showers, they do tend to zip through because it is still windy. That wind bringing a cooler feel, certainly as well. Temperatures for most in the high single digits. Through this evening and overnight, showers will continue to pack in across Scotland for much of the evening. As we go through the night, they may start to fade. Many other areas will have a dry night with clear spells, but we'll start to see that next weather system bringing rain towards Northern Ireland by dawn. A cooler night, some pockets of frost possible in parts of Scotland, but for most of us, too much of a wind to see those temperatures get down to freezing. A cooler start, though, nonetheless, and then it turns wet. That next weather system bringing outbreaks of heavy rain that could cause some problems, and the winds then start to strengthen further, particularly as we go through Tuesday afternoon and into the nighttime period across Scotland and Northern Ireland. So there are Met Office warnings in place. A mild day, but feeling cooler with the wind and the rain.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around.